Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains, episode number 724. This is the weekly show all about weather. This is the pre-show, and this is for December 2nd, 2019. This is James, and this is the time of the show where we do three things, and you know what those three things are. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. So what we're going to do here is copy a little embed code here and slap that over on the web page that they use over in Master Control to get us on the air. So we have now done that. Now we bring in our guests, and we'll see who's here. You know, last week was a first. I mean, literally 2 minutes before showtime, I was the only guy here. Could it happen again this week? And by the grace of God, Aubrey or Banowitz showed up. And then Kim Cloco McLean showed up, and everybody streamed on in. And we had a great show. I thought last week's show was really good. Kevin came in later, so it was good. So let's see who's around this week. So we are now going to invite our people on the show here. And we're going to send them a little link via email. Let's be sure I got everybody in here, and I think we do. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There we go. All right, so they have been invited. Pretty wild weather day across the country, especially in the fruited Northeast, where they've had snow in New York City today. Boston had snow in upstate New York, a lot of really heavy snow back over toward Albany and Schenectady and places like that. Been winter storm issues. They've still got snow falling up there tonight, and we'll talk about that. And we are in December. Can you believe it? We are past Thanksgiving. We are cruising toward the end of another year, 2019. It's been a good year. Bill, has it been a good year for you? And Bill can't hear a word I'm saying. Yo, Bill. Hello. He can't hear a word I'm saying, but that's okay. I know that we're on the air everywhere because I'm hearing myself coming back in my headphones. So Bill cannot hear a word. I
can now.
Hand signals.
Can you hear me now, James?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Rolling in.
Yeah, I for some reason headphones, Bluetooth, nothing works with Zoom. It works with everything else. And I've tried all the little settings, and I don't know. The only way I can talk or hear you is through the computer speakers.
I have a fairly complicated setup here. You know, I have to run some audio routing on this computer so you guys can hear things like the buzzer. And I use a program called Loopback, which is an virtual audio routing program for that. And so mine is pretty complicated, but I just click the right channels on here and it seems to work. Kim is out tonight with a sick kiddo. No. Hate it when you have a sick kiddo. Hope kiddo gets better. Aubrey, thank you for saving me last week. I'll always be grateful. You saved me.
Of course.
We were on the show, Aubrey.
we were 2 minutes before showtime. 28 after the hour. I was the only person here.
That's never happened, but it almost did.
No, that has never happened.
When they bailed, don't they?
I had just run back in studio. I mean, I think I rolled in at like 9:15 from this second dance practice, other event that I had signed up for. And I was sweaty, disheveled, and I still had a lot of stuff to do, but I wanted to listen. So I pulled up the brains and I saw that James was the only one. And I was like, I can't leave.
We can't have this.
I can't leave him hanging. So I got my gear and I hopped on and I said, James, I can't leave you like this. So And then Kim hopped on too, and she saved the show. Kim is the real hero.
And Kim's birthday is tomorrow.
Happy birthday, Kim.
Ooh.
When this show drops, it will be her birthday.
Okay. So
I have invited
you know,
our guest, and there's only one now because the other one got called away.
so the ratings are over.
The ratings for this
That
show
means
or the
nothing.
ratings for
We don't do
No,
sweeps anymore. And I think we're actually one of the few stations that don't honor the old sweeps.
I don't think there's any point in worrying about it. I mean, it still, we're hung up in it. I mean, what happens, you get detailed demographic breakdowns, you know, during those sweeps months where you get the overnights every day, but they still pay close attention to them. And so that ended, I guess, Wednesday. So we're out of ratings. My position is I go in there and do the best I can do every night. I don't care if it's ratings, not ratings. I don't, you know, I don't think about it. But they do in the consultant world and news world and everything else. John, how are you?
James.
How much snow you got?
Zip.
What?
None. None. It was an ice storm.
Ooh.
Yeah, I have a newfound respect for the influence of elevation on weather now. I drove up to Scranton from my house in Lancaster on Sunday, and it's a 245-mile round trip. I probably drove about 180 of that in freezing rain.
God.
It was miserable.
How fast were you even going?
Well, on I-81, they were still doing 65, and you couldn't even see the roadway. It was just
my
ice.
gosh.
It was insane. It was insane. But I'm here to say I survived it. But my goodness, I knew this. I remember on Thursday morning before families came over for Thanksgiving, I was looking at the weather and thinking, how am I going to get I have 2 kids in school. How am I going to get my kids back to school on Sunday with this weather? So I told my son who was at Scranton that, you know, crack of dawn, we are out of here. Well, it wasn't early enough.
Wow.
You put one on the train, can't you, Dr. John?
Yes, and she wanted to take a Christmas tree back to school. So the
yeah,
train
that
was
was
out
a
of the
little
question. So my wife took my daughter to Rutgers and I took my son to Scranton. Guess which I drew the shorter straw, I'd say.
Yeah. Let's say hello to Jeff. Jeff, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound
yeah.
great.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Well, we had a
Good
little weather out
sounding.
here as well.
Yeah, you have had some weather in California.
Yep. Well, we're up in the mountains, and yeah, we got several feet of glop at like 6,500 feet, which is good. We need glop to start the ski season.
Yeah.
And that could be a show title, but we can't do a show title yet because we haven't started the show. We need glop to start the snow season. Yeah, we're going to start here in about 20 seconds. We hit 30 after the hour. We join the television side, and we are good to go. Oh, this is so much better than the old Hangouts. Goodness. You know, I remember some nights we wouldn't get the thing going until 15 minutes in. We were 15 minutes late, and now every week we've been using Zoom. We're on time.
I know. I always felt like everybody looked at me like it was my fault, but it was.
Well, it is your fault. I mean, yeah. So welcome to our television viewers. We are now at 30 minutes after the hour. You know it's Monday night, and you know what this is. This is WeatherBrains, the pre-show magical time of the program here where we share boring stories and humorous anecdotes. Let's get this thing started. Here we go. We're going to start track number 1 and track number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, this is WeatherBrains episode number 724, the weekly show that's all about weather. This is for December 2nd, 2019. And everybody's back. Aubrey, last week, for starting off this show, it was me and you. Remember?
It was almost just you.
Almost. See, you weren't even planning on being here, and by your kindness, you came and you bailed me out. So thank you.
Thankfully, I pulled up the feed and I was watching just as I was trying to get back in sync with things, and I saw it was just you and heard it was just you, and couldn't leave you hanging, James.
Yeah, I was thinking, can I fill 2 hours by myself? And I
Yes,
probably
you can.
Oh, yes,
I'm
you
No doubt.
there's no doubt about that.
It could have been the best show ever.
Or it could have been the worst show ever. So I'm glad that you're here. So
We say that
and
every week,
announced,
though.
yeah, and Aubrey, you announced last week you're dancing again. How does this happen?
Huh?
So on the final night of Dancing with the Stars, I was asked to, so I'm not sure if I was tired, glossy-eyed, hopped up on adrenaline, or just not paying attention. But I agreed to do another fundraising thing, but I don't have to fundraise. I just have to be a backup dancer for something else. I'm actually top secret, but I don't think we have a lot of Shenandoah Valley people listening, so that's okay. So so no one tell anyone locally, but it is part of a lip sync battle, and I am part of their secret weapon. So it's a weather theme. So I agreed to be a part of this, and I've been doing some dance practice. In fact, we had our final practice tonight on my break, but it wasn't as long. So I didn't run in at 9:15. I got back at like 8:30. So, but yeah, so it was another performance. So I've been learning another two dances. They told me one, it's two. So I've learned another 2 dances, and that will end Wednesday.
Dr. John, when's the last time you danced in public?
Oh, baby. Probably at a wedding, and I don't remember it.
And that's a show title.
Too much chocolate milk.
Yeah, and we'll do a weather roundup later. We'll ask about what weather is interesting in much of the country. But no, John, welcome back. How was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, awesome, James. 21 in the house. We had a great time.
21.
21 degrees?
No, 21 people.
Wow.
Although
Well, we've learned that John has a big house. That's the one thing we've learned tonight. Wow. How did you feed these people?
Well, I grilled turkey on Thanksgiving Day. So I had 3 turkey breasts sitting in the grill, cooking away, and we went out and played the typical family football game over at the high school in 40-mile-per-hour winds, by the way.
Hopefully the wind was at your quarterback's back. I mean, that's pretty stiff.
Well, actually, I threw into the wind. At that point, I was throwing into the northwest wind, and that ball did a boomerang. It was unbelievable. Gives me newfound respect for the NFL.
Yeah, no kidding. So, Troy Kimmel, how was your Thanksgiving down in Texas?
It was okay, and I apologize about last week. I won't go into details, but I was in no condition to be here. So,
ooh,
yeah, no, it was not good last Monday night.
It's an excused absence, Joel.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, believe me, it was excused, and the doctor will give you a note. So,
there you go. I can do that for you, Troy. I
understand,
That's
Doctor.
true. We already have Doc.
The doctor with good hair. Yeah.
And that's a show title. But anyway, Troy, glad you're back on the planet, and you seem to be faring well this week.
Yeah, and I actually got to eat a little turkey on Thursday. That was my first meal of the week, and enjoyed that. Spent time with the family, and it was good.
Good, awesome. So, Bill Murray, your Bama football team lost. I'm sorry.
Huh? What are you talking about?
What
I have
about
this little
Mississippi
black
State?
pen that I only have to pull out every couple of years, and I just like blink it, and it's like it's over. I'll talk to you next August.
I got
So
it, James. You got to
let me play the wait. Let me play the Egg Bowl song.
No, you got to do it.
So
I don't know what's worse, Alabama.
A person in the middle of Texas here.
Yeah.
One of the best egg bowls I've ever seen in my life. Way to go, Mississippi State. And how's it going, Ole Miss?
Let's don't hate on them. I mean, look,
I know.
They Ole Miss made a remarkable drive at the end of the game.
Yeah.
It looked like they were going to tie that. They made an incredible 4th down conversion, and they scored a touchdown to tie the game with hardly any time left. And the guy that scored the touchdown celebrated a little too much in the end zone.
Yes.
How much do you think that cost them money wise? Cost the conference money wise? Did
I think
it keep
it
them
cost
from
the
being
coach. I think it cost
eligible?
the coach his job.
Yeah, I
mean,
believe
they
it did
fired
too,
him.
James. I believe it
They
too.
did not. They fired the Ole Miss coach.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
fired yesterday. He was fired yesterday. So,
I'm
but
on
anyway,
a
this
media
guy for the
blackout now.
and a lot of people don't like sports that listen to this show, and we don't want to take this down this path. But the guy that scored the touchdown celebrated in the end zone, and he lifted his leg like a dog and acted as though he was urinating on the field
At Mississippi State. Yeah.
right at Mississippi State, home of the
Yep.
Bulldogs, and he was flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct. Obviously, the kicker was backed up 15 yards on the point after touchdown attempt, and he missed it.
How
He
much?
Missed
This much.
And so the place went nuts, and Mississippi State won the game as the PAT was missed. That's the PEEAT was missed.
There's a show title for you.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So, Bill, you don't want to talk about football, do you?
No, I don't care about football anymore.
I had to come to the defense of your kicker today.
Well, I mean,
the social media vile and hate.
I can't even imagine.
You don't even want to know how bad it is. And I, the really nasty stuff I couldn't put out there, but I just decided, like I do with severe weather coverage, I'll take one choice hater and expose him.
Good.
It's public. Anybody can see it. So I took one of the tweeter haters and just exposed the guy. It was vile. And
There's no
this
point
guy
in
won't be, this
no
guy
matter
won't be
how
tweeting
unhappy
again.
You are,
anytime soon.
It's a game.
But anyway, bring in our guest. Let's move on here. We've had enough football brains.
Yeah, James, I'm excited tonight because I've been looking forward to the show for a long time. But tonight's guest, WeatherBrain, is the manager of a field station in the Tahoe National Forest in California. And we're going to talk Californian forest fires tonight. Jeffrey Brown, welcome to WeatherBrains.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you for taking time out to be with us. We didn't get to have Nicola Twilley, who is the author who wrote an outstanding article in the New Yorker that I read that told me all about what you were doing out there. And I reached out to her and she introduced us, and she got called away on a different assignment tonight, but we're thrilled that you're here because you're the star of the show anyway. So, but anyway, talk, we all know the rising toll of fire in California, but put it in perspective for us, Jeff.
Well, I think to put it in better perspective, we probably ought to talk about where we started and how we got to where we are. And that might make more sense to people. But, let's go back about 13,000 years when this part of the world was covered with a huge sheet of ice. And so there was really nothing here except ice and all the dirt, rock underneath of it. And as the glaciers receded, a couple of things happened. One, trees started growing, and two, people started moving onto that landscape. And so for thousands of years, those people lived in this new kind of a system. And they quickly realized that fire was a good tool. And so they would use that to help them keep the forest more open. And also they could use it to manipulate the vegetation that grew so they could get their medicinal plants, food. It was open, they could see through it. So it was easier for hunting. They could see, other people coming. And they did that really well for thousands of years. So in the summer, at the end of the summer, when they'd leave for the winter, they'd light the place on fire. And then because of this regular return of fire, all the stuff that lives there kind of adapted to it and actually, kind of made themselves need fire. And then when the Europeans arrived, a lot of the Native Americans had pretty much left the landscape through, disease that preceded the European arrival. And then, the shift that the Europeans put, the new Americans, the pressures that they put on that population. And in our part of the world, when they ran the Transcontinental Railroad through, it went right through Truckee. And they needed wood for that. And so they pretty much denuded the Central Sierras, and that wood was used to create this railroad and all the infrastructure that went along with it. And then they found gold in California and they found silver in Nevada. And that was kind of the second cut of the Central Sierras, because that wood was used to build the communities, shore up the mines. And we did something different then. We then moved ourselves and our communities into that landscape. Whereas in the past, the previous peoples used the landscape in the summer and then left in the winter. So they really weren't creating these permanent kind of structures. And we didn't like it when they would catch on fire because we would lose our homes, we'd lose our communities, and we got really good at putting these things out. So the U.S. Forest Service, which is a federal agency, they were, they probably still are, the largest fire department on the planet. But things have caught up, subtly over time. We've created what I like to call a perfect campfire. So I don't know if you guys, go camping or whatever and build a campfire, but, typically what you want to burn on the campfire is the big thing. And if you've experienced campfires, you know that you just don't put the big log in there and light a match to it. You pretty much start with a bunch of little stuff, like pine needles or whatever, and then you keep adding slightly larger stuff. And once that all gets burning, now you can start to burn the larger piece of wood. And when the Native Americans managed the landscape, there wasn't a whole lot of little stuff there. And because there was so much regular fire, all the stuff on the ground was pretty much gone. So what we call the duff layer was pretty thin way back when. And now the duff layer is very thick. And so they also, because of the regular return of fire, didn't have these little trees and slightly larger trees and slightly larger trees. So if you think about building a ladder, that's what we've done through suppression. We've allowed this stuff to get overgrown. We have a very thin layer on the bottom of little stuff. And then we have the next bigger trees and then the next bigger trees and the next bigger trees, which now takes us all the way up into the canopy of the bigger trees. And so now all we're looking for is the ignition source. So once we light a fire, these things now get huge in a hurry. And it's because we've built the perfect campfire, but we've built the perfect campfire that's over 1 million acres, it's millions of acres in size. And so right now, just in the Sierras of California, the forested part of the Sierras, we're burning up just in California about 1.5 million acres a year of what we call stand replacing fires. So these fires are so big and so hot that they're pretty much consuming everything, including the seed bank and kind of sterilizing the soils. And we are now able to start thinning, but we're thinning 30, 40, 50,000 acres a year. And if you just took a big map and drew a big 1 million acre circle and a bunch of little 30, 40,000 acre circles, you'll see very quickly how the landscape is getting overwhelmed. And the other thing that's happened is the climate has shifted. So we're now getting hotter and drier than we have in the past, particularly during the summer. And for our part of the world, we're used to getting our moisture, our rain in the form of snow in the winter. And our winters are changing. We're not getting the snowpack that we used to have. And as a result, we're now kind of experiencing these drought cycles, which tend to stress out all the stuff, what I call straws, that are dependent on the water. And so we've built kind of a perfect storm for a forest catastrophe. And I think right now we're struggling with that because we're now experiencing that in very real, very graphic terms.
How did the Native Americans know to do it that way?
Well,
that's really fast.
I don't know if they knew, because lightning would strike, fires would happen on their own. But they did this for thousands of years. So they have a much longer track record than we do. It took us a long time to figure it out. And I think now, we're in a really good sense for what we need to do, but we have to completely shift a whole public paradigm. We need to shift a culture. And I think that cultural shift is now happening. But then, we need to also figure out that this is not an it's not an inexpensive thing for us to do. It's really, really, really expensive. And the cheapest tool that we can use is low intensity prescribed fire. But we have a lot of work restructuring wise of the forest before a lot of people are really comfortable at reintroducing fire. It's a $100 billion problem just in the Sierras, which is real money.
Jeff, Troy Kimmel here. Thanks for being with us, by the way, tonight. Got a kind of a broad question for you. Do you, I think for a long time, in fact, I know for a long time, based on what I heard from people and what I hear from people, they thought to what you did with what was environmental, they thought being good environmentalists was basically hands off the forest. We see that as well in some of the areas in the Mediterranean climate in the south and western, or on the California coast and areas like that, where people would let vegetation grow up the edge of their houses. Do you think we're getting better now, Jeff? And I realize you're inland a little bit, the Tahoe National Forest, but do you think we're getting better now about understanding that being environmental, as far as this is concerned, is not something where you just hands off? It really, being environmental means going in and helping maintain our forest, like you point out. Are we getting better in understanding that nowadays?
I think we are. I think one of the big mistakes we made was by thinking of our forests as a commodity. We cut all the trees. I mean, and this country was going through huge growth. So at the time, we really didn't know what those consequences were going to be. And we also know that, if we just take out the big stuff, which is what our timber industry is structured to do, I mean, and they're good at it and they're needed, but we don't really have that much big stuff anymore. Our problem now is all this littler stuff. And there's no market and there really is no industry to deal with that. But I think from an environmental perspective, we have this fantasy. So when the Europeans moved their way west, they were going into a landscape that looked really good. And I've heard estimates now that just in California, there were millions of Native Americans that were in the state before the Europeans arrived. And again, their populations got decimated by disease long before the Europeans actually physically arrived on the landscape. And so when they moved out west, they thought they were seeing Shangri-La. We have this fantasy called wilderness. We saw this thing that was beautiful, and we thought that it was a self-managed thing, whereas the reality was these were heavily managed landscapes, and we need to get back into managing them in a way that better suits the system. We can't manage for 2x4s anymore. Those days are over, because we're now just California alone, I believe about 60 to 70% of the water supply for the state of California and big parts of northern central Nevada are dependent on these forested ecosystems. Yep. So in water is what the new gold, the new oil. It's a very limited commodity. And it's also very expensive to treat to get it to something that we can use. So I think things have shifted, and I think we're now ready, but I think we're just waiting for leadership to basically say, okay, we need to do something bold and we need to do something now.
I don't think that people, Jeff, probably appreciate the fact, and especially people that don't live where you live or in the state of California, understand the vicious cycle that the seasons can be with all this, because as you point out, you get your precipitation during the winter, and especially when you get out in the Mediterranean climate, you get into an environment where the vegetation is xerophytic. It's got to survive the summer, which is the dry time of the year, and then you get into the Santa Ana of the fall, and off to the south and distant west of you in those areas, here comes a fire that's burning xerophytic vegetation, which after a long summer burns like lighter fluid. And then, of course, you get into the winter 2 or 3 months later, and you have mudslides in the burn scar areas. It's really pretty amazing in that environment out there. And I got to kind of follow up what Bill talked about a couple of minutes ago. It's really pretty amazing to me how intelligent and how smart the Native Americans were in figuring out how to try to manage this back in the day.
Agreed.
Hey, Jeff, John Scull here. It occurred to me, listening to your conversation here, that one of the the wild cards in all this is a much more variable jet stream. And we have been recognizing strengthening Santa Ana when they develop. How do you deal with that kind of atmospheric wild card that we really cannot control?
That's hard because, you know, like the Paradise Fire, the campfire, that fire started in a place that had been burned within the last 20 years. People didn't think that that was a problem. But when you're getting the kinds of winds that we're seeing now, that you just described, I don't think there's a whole lot that we can do about that. I mean, we can thin, but I don't think we can thin enough. Once the winds get over 60 miles an hour, it's pretty hard to do anything other than asphalt.
So how much of this problem is political, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of the solution is political.
I actually, that's more correct to the, right?
Yeah, because
That's more correct.
yeah, we need to be allocating the resources to do the fix. And the federal government seems to be retracting a little bit. In doing this, the state of California, I know, is throwing a lot of money at the problem. But I think one of the problems that we're dealing with, and I don't think a lot of people recognize this, is that this is an emergency. You know, the green trees, the living trees are the emergency because they're now stressed. We hear about all these huge bark beetle invasions. Well, that's the system trying to reset itself. You know, it's just not working on our time scale. And so we also know that when these things get stressed, they release ethylenes, chemicals, gases into the atmosphere. And the bark beetles have evolved to go after the trees that are releasing the most of this chemical because they know it's stressed. And the way the tree fights a beetle attack is it tends to flush sap and to try to flush the beetle back out of the hole that it came in. And the beetles know that, well, if this tree is stressed, it means it doesn't have water, which means it can't flush me out when I try to go after it. But I think that we're throwing our money, everybody likes to spread the love. You know, if you got a limited, even if it's $1 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, it doesn't go that far. And then when you try to have everybody think that they're getting a small piece of that, we're ending up doing a solution that's more trying to put a bunch of dots on the landscape, and the dots really don't connect to each other. And so we're really not shifting the trajectory much at all. I think in my opinion, we need to be focusing our energy and resources on some very strategic, large tracts of land and trying to push them back into a better state. And then we can learn a lot from that. And then we can apply that so that as we get this area done and we get it down to where we can start dealing with it with fire, particularly prescribed fire, I think over time we'll catch up. But, we're looking at, if we were doing 1 million acres a year, which is at the same scale of what we're losing a year, that's about $1 billion. And there's like 17 million acres that need to have something done, or that could have something done. And so that's, a 20-year amortization schedule.
Jeff,
but we're also spending, several $1 billion a year trying to suppress these things. And we're actually not suppressing these things. What typically puts out one of these large fires is the weather changes, or they run out of stuff to burn. It's not the millions and millions of dollars a day that we throw at them. I mean, we're pretty good now at protecting some properties, some structures. But as far as, the hero firefighter out in front fighting these things, they're not. They're working these things along the sides until they can get them contained. And so, if we were to start throwing $1 billion at the problem, which is the solution, over time, we'll be shifting the monies from suppression to management. We'll still always need to be able to respond to fire, the stuff that we don't start. But we need to be bold, and we need to step up.
Jeff, I have a quick question. I've got to go into show real quick, but is it even possible, we've talked about there've been a lot of the power outages with PG&E and the power lines and everything. Is there any sort of talk, push, especially in forested areas, to bury the power lines? Is that even feasible? I know it's obviously a super expensive cost. Is it even possible in these heavily forested areas to do that, to reduce a risk in some locations?
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like a good idea up front, but again, somebody who knows more about that would have to, kind of answer that question. What I really like about these power outages is it's causing everybody to feel our pain. People think water comes out of the faucet at their house. And these forest fires are big, and if you're not on fire, it's not your problem. Whereas now, because PG&E is shutting the power off to communities, everybody is now feeling the real effect of the problem. And I know it's horrible because my campus, Berkeley, got shut down a bunch during these PG&E shutoffs. But it's good because everybody now, it's real. It's not something that happens to other people, because now everybody has an opportunity to experience, some inconvenience because of the problem.
So Jeff, you mentioned prescribed burns being an important solution, but are there rules and regulations that prevent you from doing as many as you could, or is it strictly a money problem?
It's complicated. We have to worry about air quality regulations. And I'm all for a very strong air quality policy. But these large fires, they don't apply for a burning permit. And they're burning up all kinds of stuff, more than just wood. But yet when we want to do a prescribed fire, we have to make sure that our conditions are okay atmospherically. I mean, California's got problems because we're basiny, so we tend to hold a lot of really bad air. And because the air tends to move from the West Coast to the East Coast, all this smoke that we create in California ends up getting stuck in like Nevada and Utah. And so we need to rethink about this a lot. And we need to be able to open up more burn windows, particularly in the time of year when we want to be burning on our terms, which is spring or fall, which is typically when we have more air moving. We don't want to be burning in the summer, which is when these big fires are happening, and into the early fall. We want to be burning in the later fall and in the spring, when we have much better dispersion. But I think that particularly the air board in California, they're getting it. They're starting to understand that, the emissions from a prescribed fire are significantly different than the emissions from a non-prescribed fire. And that if you're thinking about better or, good versus evil, prescribed fire is by far, from an atmospheric and a pollution perspective, a hell of a lot better than an unprescribed fire. So we're getting there. But I also think, we tend to move forward in stuttered steps, because there's lots of pieces to this puzzle. And I think of this as kind of 5 different areas that we need to be addressing. And they need to be working and moving in parallel and working and supporting each other. And I call it A, B, MPS. So A is the arts. We need a cultural shift. We need to accept that prescribed fire and the smoke from that is a good thing. And typically the way you shift culture is not through laws, it's through the arts. So we need to create an artistic response at the same scale of, say, the management response. So that's A. B is business. We need to create, in addition to the timber industry that we currently have, we need to create a completely different timber industry that can deal with the problem. The problem is small stuff, not big stuff. And right now we don't have we have small ways to deal with that. So, and if you also think about wood, it's carbon-based. You can play with carbon, so we need to be bringing a completely different kind of thinker to this problem, because you could do something with that other than just think about making boards or burning it, you know, in a cogen plant or whatever. Management side, the M, I think we pretty much now have a pretty good handle on what we need to do, you know, creating these patchy mosaics on the landscape instead of these nice clean cornrows, like a forest that's managed for 2x4s. You know, a forest that's managed for the ecosystem and everything else is more patchy. And we know that fire behaves differently in a patchy landscape as compared to a pretty homogenized landscape. We also know that on a steep south-facing slope, doesn't have a lot of water, dries out quickly, fire loves that. Wildlife really doesn't use it. It's not really storing our water. So, you know, we do a completely different thing on a south-facing slope than we would, say, on a north-facing slope. And so creating these different templates that we lay across the landscape is really important, because every acre can't be the same. Every acre needs to be managed for where it is, elevation and aspect. So I'm comfortable that we are there, and then we're creating some really large scale tools that will be helpful to everybody. You know, using airborne lidar, that laser mapping, where you can create a 3-dimensional model that's pretty accurate, like down to like 20 centimeters in the horizontal and, you know, 10 centimeters in the vertical. You know, that's like pretty real when you look at it. And now we're really close to being able to tease out species for like the smaller diameter trees from that information. So that, from a planning perspective, the tool wise, using technology, I think we're there, and we're really close to being able to plan at the 1 million acre size landscape. So that's management. I'm fairly comfortable with that. Policy, you know, we need the legislation and the sweeteners, you know, that are helping us get rid of a lot of these chokes, you know, that are slowing us down. And they need to be learning as we're learning, so that we're anticipating the next choke, so we don't hit that spot and have to stop and wait for the policy side to catch up or adapt. This needs to be happening more in real time. And then the last one is what I call science, the S. We need to be collecting data. And because once you collect data, then you can convert that into some form of knowledge, which is what we need to be doing. You know, are we doing the right thing? I have no idea. I think we are. And I think our prescriptions now are tuned, but it's over time that we'll learn from what we're doing. I mean, we're going to make mistakes, and having good data and good people interpreting that for us will help us. So I think if we were moving forward with all these 5 things kind of in parallel, and talking to each other instead of siloed like we typically are, I think we could do this, because I'm firmly convinced that this is a man-made problem. We made this problem. And I think that this is a problem that if we created the public and the political will, that we could fix.
So how important are reaching the kids in this educational outreach process?
They're the ones that have to deal with this mess. So they're critical. We do a lot with kids, and they're awesome because they get it. And they're scared. You know, kids these days seem to have a lot of angst. You know, they're worried about stuff. And we know we have a program with our school district where all the 5th grade classes come out at the beginning of the school year for 3-day, 2-night program. And because, you know, we can't use buses because their timing is really weird, you know, the parents bring the kids out, and we don't like kids staying in cabins by themselves. So we have parents come to stay, you know, as service chaperones in the cabins. And it is really awesome to watch how when the kids get fired up, you immediately see their parents engage, when in the past, the parents probably weren't engaged because they're worried about so many other things. So your point is right on. Dealing with our youth is critical, because they're the ones that are going to have to suffer they're going to suffer the consequences, and they need to help push us, the old people, you know, to do something that's going to help them.
So when the big fires of last summer happened and the president spoke out, did his rhetoric help, hurt, or mean nothing in the bigger scheme of things, Jeff?
Oh, I don't think it was helpful. You know, raking our forests really is not the solution. It's a tool, And we need to be really, what we need to be raking around is our houses. We do a lot of stuff. And I don't know if I can do this, but so Patagonia is a clothing company and their distribution center is in Reno. And they have their employees get involved with all kinds of voluntary kinds of things. And so Patagonia every year sends up some of their employees with the sugar pine plantation, and we plant sugar pines at Sagehen. And one year they were all up and I was saying, this is like awesome. This is pretty cool. What else would you guys like to do? And they said, we would love to help you burn these piles. And so, we're on federal land, we're on Forest Service managed land. And so I go to our partners at the Forest Service and say, hey, what do you guys think? And they say, this is awesome, but they need to get this basic certification. It's called a red card. It's what every wildland firefighter person needs to have. And it's you take 4 online classes and then you do a day of field training, which is pretty much how to cut lines, scrape a line, and what to do if things go wrong. And so we figured out how to do that. So we actually did our first red carding for artists and scientists a couple of weeks ago. And it was great because now we have a way to get people that would then be allowed onto an active federally managed fire landscape. And we're now looking to create opportunities to bring the public into the fire. I mean, it's weird because, if you sit there and stare at the campfire, you can't help yourself. We humans, we have this innate connection to fire. And for a long period of time, it was pretty real to us. And we've pretty much severed that connection, that real connection that we had with it. And so now we're looking for ways where we can try to get people now more actively engaged in a burn. And now that we know the mechanism to do that, it's a pretty simple training thing. We're going to start now trying to create opportunities for the public to actually engage in prescribed fire.
Wow, that's really cool. When you think about, sandbags before a flood, you're not going to get harmed in that process. But a fire is a different ball game.
It is, but prescribed fire is very different than an unprescribed fire.
So
because we're doing those on our terms. Now they do get away from us sometimes, but
not very often, right?
Not very often, but they do. I mean, it's we're playing with fire, right?
Yeah, no question about it. Talk about the role of meteorologists in managing those prescribed fires and in helping fight the big fires too.
It's critical. So there's now, the Forest Service now has on staff a scientist that's a meteorologist that's deals with modeling smoke behavior. And it's critical because now we can get him to look at the landscape and look at the conditions and start creating maps and models that will show us where the smoke's going to go and how it's going to disperse. That's key. But then also, when you think in terms of being in condition to burn, we need to know what today's weather is, but we also need to know what tomorrow's weather is going to be and, get better guesses at looking out into the future. So it's like, well, today may be great, but if we get it going today and tomorrow the wind is going to crank and it's going to, get really hot and dry, maybe we don't want to start the fire today, even though we are in prescription. So all those meteorologists play a key role in helping us deal with both a large fire and setting us up to have a better chance of success for a prescribed fire.
Jeff, it seems to me the insurance industry could be playing a role here. I'm thinking about these, as an analogy, multi-million-dollar homes going up along the coastline, just waiting to be nailed by a tropical cyclone, and the insurance industry will then pay out and rebuild in the same place. It seems to me that out west, California, and some of these fire-prone areas, as long as insurance is there and homes can be built right up next to the forest line, that you're running the risk of any kind of fire destroying a very expensive home, a dwelling and its contents. So maybe the insurance industry should be stepping up and saying, you can't have forest that close to your home anymore. There's got to be, a margin around it where there can't be any structures.
No, you're right. We actually brought representatives of the insurance industry out a couple of years ago just to talk about what we're doing with the Sage and Forest project. And they said, wow, this is like awesome. Nobody's done this. And, cause they live within the footprint of the landowner, their client. And they hadn't really thought much about how can we be involved, them be involved in the landscape that surrounds the communities that they're insuring. And it started a kind of a little bit of a different conversation. But when we were doing this red card training, the guy who was kind of took us by the hand and was leading us through it has a lot of experience as a hotshot. So this guy's been on a lot of fires.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, when you look at the dramatic TV coverage, it's, there's not much you can do with that. But he says on most of the fires that he's been involved with, go into the communities that have been consumed. And those are typically from just a slow moving, creeping fire. And he said, just people that raked like a foot around their house and got rid of the bushes and trees and stuff that were going up under their eaves. He said, those are the homes that were still there after.
Yeah.
And those that didn't do that, those are the ones that were just the pile of ash and junk, left over. So, again, it's solvable. So we also work a lot with artists, as I tried to imply earlier. And so this hotshot guy, Travis, he had this brilliant idea. So we set up an area at Sagehen. We're calling it the public burn triangle. And so it's a place that we've installed a bunch of artwork that we're going to burn and transform. And we'll allow the public to engage when we do that. But he said, why don't we just build a bunch of little tiny homes, just little wooden houses, make them all the same, and just set them on this landscape. And then just have the one where you did nothing around it. And then the one where you did a little something around it. And the one where you did a little something more. And then just light a low intensity fire and just let it creep through this subdivision and let people see it. And I think he said, just from his perspective, he said that would make a huge impact on people. Because you don't see that, the media is not covering that stuff. They're covering the drama, the really big stuff.
Is there any money available to help homeowners do those sort of mitigation efforts in advance, Jeff?
There is some. I know in California, there's a lot of grant money available, but it's kind of harder to get. But a lot of communities are now starting to pool their resources, to try to go after a chunk of money and then figure out how to disperse the little bits to other folks. But, if I owned a home in a forest, I'd be doing something. But my perspective is a bit different than most people's perspective because I live it. I worry about burning up every single year because I live at the field station, and we're in the forest, and we see it, we feel it. Whereas most people in an urban area or in a subdivision really have a different kind of a relationship with the place that they live. But we need experiences. We need real world chances to connect viscerally, emotionally with something. And you don't do that by just watching big fires on TV because all it does is scare you. It really doesn't help you get a sense for having any kind of a control or to let you know what you really can do,
So talk for a second about Sagehen because you've mentioned it several times and we've been remiss in not asking you to explain it further. Talk about the experimental forest and what you're doing there and what are some other, cool things that are happening.
Okay, well, the Sagehen Creek Field Station is owned and operated by the University of California, Berkeley. And it was started in 1951. And it was really established to study fish. The California legislature was thinking, this is in the 40s, that California ought to have a wildlife and fisheries program within their university system. And back then the university system was one, it was just Berkeley. So they went to Berkeley and say, hey, what do you guys think? And Berkeley said, this is a great idea. And so the faculty folks there, one was a wildlife guy, the other one was a guy who worked on bugs that live in creeks. And they were thinking that they wanted to do something in addition to whatever classes you would teach, on a university campus. So what they originally wanted to do was to find a small creek that ran year round because they wanted to dam off sections of the creek move the water, divert the water out of the main channel, and then pump those sections dry so that they could see what lived in a creek. And remember, this is the 40s. And so somehow in their hunting and fishing in the Sierras, they found Sage Hen Creek. And in the winter of 1950-51, they skied out with some California legislators and some representatives of the Forest Service. And that was when the field station was begun. So Sage Hen, first 10 years of Sage Hen was studying basically trout. And then over time, it's evolved. And I got to Sage Hen in 2001. And so I'm not a scientist. I like to say I have a BS in BS. I have a bachelor's of science in business services. So my job really, I think more is to serve as the plucky comic relief. The person who can say things that a scientist wouldn't say because they always get, they always go down too deep in the weeds. And when I got there, we moved there from Moab, Utah, which is where our home is. And it's a completely different place than living in Tahoe National Forest. And our first summer at Sage Hen was interesting for us because there was a big fire in the River Canyon between Truckee and Reno in June, which was unusual. And then there were 2 other large fires around Sage Hen that summer. So our first summer, we lived in smoke. And I really didn't quite know how to think about that because I also thought that I was a really strong environmentalist. And I was of the mindset that anybody who talks about cutting down a tree is doing something wrong. But I also realized that over time and learning about the history, that my mindset was wrong, that we needed to be doing something. And then in 2001, the Forest Service came out for the Sierras with a document that was basically suggesting that, okay, we don't know what to do because we're getting killed in court with every timber project that we're proposing by the environmentalists for very good reasons. But we need to propose something. And so they proposed something called SPLAT, which is an acronym, SPLAT, strategically placed land area treatments. And so basically, if you imagine having a monster truck with these huge tires on it, and the lugs on the tires are 150 acres in size and are rectangularly shaped, and then they're perpendicular to each other. And if you drove the truck across the landscape, everywhere a lug would hit, you would thin. And the idea behind that was if a large fire slammed into a forested landscape that had been splatted, it would bring the fire to the ground and slow it down and buy you some time. Or if a fire started in an area that had been splatted, it wouldn't get up under the canopy and take off. And so that was like interesting. And the only real work that had been done other than some really cursory modeling was they went to Western Utah in a flat cheatgrass desert and they tilled the pattern and they burned it and it performed admirably. So now we have somebody proposing to do something on a landscape that has topography and trees. And so we thought that was our opportunity to maybe help by maybe finding and getting some science that would say this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. You might want to think of something different. And that's kind of what launched us on this whole forest management perspective. And so we're the best inventoried forest west of the Mississippi. So our 9,000 acres is got 531 plots on a grid. Every one of those plots is 500 square meters. Every tree is individually tagged species. We know a lot about that forest. And at the time that we did this was when airborne LIDAR, that airborne laser mapping was coming. And so we were a place that was used to actually ground truth airborne LIDAR because we had this great inventory. And we also then got a forest history. So because we're on the east side of the Sierras, which means we're on the dry side, things do not rot on the east side of the Sierras. They desiccate, they dry out. We still have tree stumps left over from the Comstock logging area in the 1800s. So we were able to get fire history back to the 1600s. And what we learned was that pre-European arrival, what the Native Americans would call pre-contact, the mean return interval for fire at Sage Hen was about 2.4 years, and it was low intensity. And then post-European contact, it went to 24 years, high intensity. So you can see immediately how when the different management prescription was applied, the effect that it had on fire within that 9,000 acres. And it also allowed us to take the models. It's called Farsight, is the big model that everybody uses when they're fighting one of these large fires. So you'll start a fire here, which is typically where the fire started. You dump in all the weather, all the forest structure, all that data, and then you can kind of map out, model out how that fire is going to progress over time. And that tool is what the firefighting crews will use to kind of strategize. We also, so when we were doing that, we're now feeding in this really good data into the model, and we're getting kind of different results than the data that the agencies would use. And so we were thinking we were messing up. We were thinking that maybe we were looking at the forest differently than the agencies were. And that was great because we had a big grant, and we partnered the scientists with the land managers. So we had 2 Berkeley faculty, a guy named John Battles, who's a wildlife forest ecologist, and another guy, Scott Stephen, who's a fire ecologist. And we partnered them with our Forest Service district ranger, the land manager, because we wanted to make sure that what we were doing would also help them. And that was great, but for about a year, we really didn't know how to talk to each other. And it was when we realized that we had a problem with the data, and that was the big breakthrough, where we said, well, why don't we just go stand at one of our plots, and we'll use this flip chart book, which is what they would use when they were kind of trying to code this forest structure. And we stood on the plots and flipped our little books, and we all ended up on the same page. And that was the day that the land managers and the scientists were able to figure out that, okay, we were both bringing something of value because we were wearing the same lenses. We're looking at this place the same way. And then it was like, okay, what's the problem? And it turned out there were some things with the model that we were then able to identify and then tweak to get them model runs that they were a little more comfortable with. But in that process, we learned that there was another part of that model that nobody used called Flam Map, which allows you to take the larger landscape and simultaneously light a fire at every pixel on the landscape. And it's a great planning tool. And that allows you to figure out where your big problem areas are. Maybe that's where you start some work, maybe not, I don't know. And that moved forward. And then we thought, well, maybe we, the science people, we really don't have the expertise to figure out what we should propose. And the land managers were like going, well, maybe we need to be thinking a little bit differently about what we would want to do at Sagen. So we worked with them to create a collaborative process where we brought in everybody from the timber industry to the environmental groups that were litigating all these things, all the feds, state agencies, a lot of local, organizations, non-government organizations, NGOs, and some concerned citizens. And we did a 1.5-year project where we started at Sagen and we said, okay, do we have a problem? Everybody said yes. And then it's like, well, what do we do? And that was great because that then allowed us a way to have all the voices at the table that were then able to represent all the values that people assign to a landscape. And the project that we came out with had support of everybody. And that was awesome. So when you have everybody agreeing, then something can happen, I think, really positively. And that's the Sagen Forest Project. And, when we did that, we thought we were done. We thought, well, okay, we'll just do this. But then we had to figure out, okay, well, there's money and there's no timber industry and we have to deal with the public and we need to be dealing with policy. So every time, as you peel an onion, there's more layers. And that's kind of the Sagen Forest Project. We started out with what we thought was a simple little onion that got more and more complicated. And I think we've now been through all the layers that were at the core. And I think that's why I can say that I think we're ready to actually do something significant.
Is the timber industry at the table, Jeff?
Absolutely.
Are they
Absolutely.
participating?
Really?
Yep, absolutely.
Talk for a second. It's counterintuitive to us. We watch the plots of the snow during the winter out there and pull really hard for you guys because we feel terrible, what you go through every year. And we hurrah when we see great water years and, we think, it'll be a good fire year. But that's counterintuitive to what really happens, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, this year we had our second So when you think about the climate, Sage Hen, we have a USGS gauge, United States Geological Survey gauge on the creek that's been there since the early 50s. We have weather data that goes back to the early 50s. And it was 3 years ago, we had the biggest winter on record. And then the next year, we had one of the driest winters on record. And then the next winter, which was last winter, we had our second wettest winter on record. So it's kind of weird to think that you have your two biggest years, and in between, you have your driest year. Yeah. So that, to me, is this whole climate discussion in a nutshell, because we're now seeing extremes that are becoming more regular.
And isn't that a recipe, Jeff, for fires? Because if you build up that fuel source and then you dry it out, and you have any kind of
the snowpack, which is what I call our slow drip irrigation system. It releases the water slowly over time. Yeah. When we have a big winter, it releases more water, and living organisms love that, particularly vegetation. So they'll grow bigger and longer. But then we ultimately get hit when it's dry, and they dry out, and all of a sudden we get, grasses that are, instead of being 12 inches tall, are 24 and 36 inches tall. So it creates a different problem. I mean, this year was weird because the fire season in California took forever to get going, and then it hit pretty hard. So it was delayed. I mean, everybody was ready for the big fire year, and it didn't happen. And so people lose interest, but it ultimately happened. We ended up burning a lot of stuff this year, just like we were doing every year. Which is kind of
James,
sad.
I know you want to wrap here in just a minute, but anything else that you need to share with us, Jeff, that's an important topic that maybe we didn't touch on tonight?
Well, I was really sad to see that Nikki wasn't able to make this show, because Nikki put a lot of energy into her story. And I think, I would have loved to have the chance to kind of get her perspective, because she talked to a lot of people, and it's always good to have ways to kind of validate your story, and maybe adjust it accordingly. So I really think it would be interesting to, at some point, get her perspective. And I appreciate you guys engaging in this, because this, again, is a problem that we can fix if we decide.
Well, she's truly a delight, and we were saddened that she couldn't join us tonight. If you were the steak, she might have been the sizzle. But we'll have her back soon, and have you back too, because I think she really would make for a great guest again when we talk about this subject.
Hey, Jeff, let me ask you one question. How would you grade the media when it comes to covering the fires in California?
Well, they cover the fires well, but what they don't cover is the fix. We it's the boring stuff. It's the story. If we treated our living forests as an emergency, and we send in the emergency responders, they're going to do triage. They walk past the dead stuff. They're focused on what they can try to keep alive. And that's the story we're missing. Is the problem is not the dead trees, what's already burned. The problem is the green living stuff. What are we going to do to keep it green and living? And we miss that completely.
Okay, well, awesome. Well, thank you. You've given us an hour of your time. We appreciate that, Jeff. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm easy. It's email. And if you can remember a bird called a sage hen, SAGEHEN, I'm sagehen at Berkeley with 3 E's, BERKELEY.edu. And if they want to get in touch, I'm more than glad to connect with them.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate the hour. Fascinating topic. Hope to have you back real soon in the show. Thanks a lot for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Thank you so much. We are going to take a quick break here, and hopefully Aubrey can do email in just a second. We're going to take a break for Tony Rice. We're going to come back with the weather roundup, email inbox, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
It's the first week of December. You know what season it is? Depends on who you ask, I suppose. Assuming we're talking about the northern hemisphere, that narrows it down a little bit, but not completely. If you ask an astronomer, they point to the equinoxes and solstices to divide the seasons. Ask a meteorologist, or perhaps more specifically a climatologist, and they point to December 1st as the first day of winter. Why the difference? According to a Capital Weather Gang article a few years back, Derek Arndt, who's chief of climate monitoring at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, quote, meteorological seasons have been around since the early to mid 20th century, when it really took root in the applied weather and climate communities. Dealing with whole month chunks of data rather than fractions of months just made more sense. The resulting meteorological seasons include 90 days for winter, 92 days for spring, 92 days for summer, and 91 days in fall. Leap years add a day to winter. Now, if you look at the astronomical definition of the seasons, Earth's elliptical orbit kind of causes some variations in there between 89 and 93 days, depending on the year. And that makes comparing data year to year much more difficult. But did you know there's a third definition? Known as traditional reckoning, it's measured by the incoming solar radiation, or insolation. Summer is defined as the 90 days with the most insolation, winter as the 90 days with the least, and autumn and spring are crammed in between. However, insolation values are defined not just by the time of year, but the latitude where they're measured, and even the atmospheric conditions at the time. In the end, the December solstice on either the 20th or the 21st, depending on the year, it's not a great place to celebrate the beginning of winter. Even ancient calendars tend to agree with that. The Chinese lunisolar calendar, which is divided into 24 solar terms, puts Lidong, the Winter Begins festival, around November 7th. The Celtic calendar marks winter start on November 1st. On this calendar, the solstice is a midwinter festival. So what does all this mean? When discussing the seasons, it's important to include the definition that was used, especially when calculating. If you were to take average temperatures across a season, meteorological winter can produce very different answers than astronomical winter. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me in RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
We are doing this show on Monday, December the 2nd, and the weather has been wild over much of the country. And John, you're closest to the action, so you say you've gotten ice you've been dealing with, huh?
Yeah, James, let's go to the water vapor. The water vapor shows all. And you can see that closed low right now. It's moving off the mid-Atlantic coast into the western Atlantic. And this has been a real problem. I don't know if you've noticed any of the forecasts, but for some people, this is turning into a bust. It has not. Go ahead.
I cannot believe we did not get any snow bands here today.
We didn't either. We didn't either.
These types of closed upper lows always tend to overperform. You get these rogue snow bands. Sometimes you can get one of those deformation zones, and you get the omega forcing, and I'm shocked.
I'm with you there. This has been a real struggle. If you've looked at any of the ensemble members, there was a wide range. So where are you going to put your forecast? There was no consensus in terms of snowfall. And that it's bound to bust when you have a situation like that. In fact, I think there was a winter storm warning still up, maybe even this evening, over the northern portion of New Jersey and northeastern Pennsylvania, but it's just not going to make it. Now, in this system now,
upper low weatherman's woe. You know the story.
Oh, yeah. Very difficult.
The upper low is usually what kicks our butts. I mean, if you want to bust in the overperforming, that's usually what does it here.
Yeah, but this one, I think the way it evolved and slid off to the east-southeast, it put really there's NVA occurring over you right now. It's not upward motion anymore.
Yeah, so for us, it goes either way down here in the deep south. It can overperform, it can underperform, and often in the standard NWP techniques we all use, they don't work very well. It remains a mystery to a large degree, and you've got to really be observant. And I feel sorry for anybody having to forecast the conditions with this thing. Now, I saw it was snowing in New York City. John, do you know how much they've gotten today? in New York?
No, I don't. But the forecast for Manhattan essentially was about 2 to 4 inches. But I think they're really going to have to work hard to make that happen. Upstate New York is where the big numbers were, 12 inches.
Yeah,
up around
looked like
Finger
Albany.
Lakes.
Albany was slammed today.
Yeah.
Schenectady and places like that, and Boston. I know they had a winter storm warning in effect there, but yeah, those things are so hard to deal with. Troy, you have no issues with snow where you are, do you?
No, in fact, it has been pleasant today. We actually, Saturday, let me think, Saturday officially up to 87 at Austin Bergstrom International Airport, and also out at Camp Mabry. Those that set a brand new daily temperature record, beat out the old records, which went back to the 40s, I believe at Camp Mabry, 50 out at Bergstrom. And it beat that old record by at least 3 degrees, so or 3 to 4 degrees. So
excuse me while I go pop an antidepressant.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, but we've cooled back down since. So we managed to get a cold front about sunset on Saturday evening. Dry front yesterday was beautiful. Today was beautiful. I think probably 75 tomorrow. Another little weak wind shift, a little trough or line of low pressure that kind of goes through here. I think tomorrow evening, a stronger front Thursday night into Friday. That one's a dry front. And then by Monday and Tuesday, it looks a little more interesting. Maybe a chance of rain around here, another front sometime during the day on Monday and into the first part of next week. But one thing around here that is a concern is the fact that we continue to be relatively dry. We haven't gotten much. Where rainfall overall for the year is not bad, but we've been really dry over the last 4 months or so.
Yeah, James, Troy, we went the other direction. You know, we were complaining in October about, that drought starting to creep north, but we've gone completely 180. We were 2.5 inches above normal for November. I picked up 0.8 in the last 12 hours from this event. Can you imagine, Aubrey, if that were cold enough for snow?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's interesting that on Saturday we're 87 here in Austin. But 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks early, by the way, we had sleet here. So, I mean, it's just, if nothing else, it seems to be variable to some degree, especially, I was taught in the newspaper this weekend. I said, remember winter back in early November when it wasn't winter? You know, and you sort of say that and people remember it, but it's been extremes here.
Mm-hmm. We should mention down here where I am in the Deep South, we had snow flurries this morning. In the heart of Dixie. This was early this morning in the northeastern part of the state with a cold core upper low. It didn't amount to anything, but temperatures here today where I am, they were 25 degrees below average. We had many cities that held in the 30s all day today with
James,
a biting.
Did they close school?
Let me check. No, they didn't. You know, one flake was observed, and sometimes they'll close it for one flake, but they did not in this case. So, Aubrey, we're going to do email in just a second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I'll give you about a minute here. Let me just pause for 1 second and say, I have to recognize the loss, very shocking loss of one of the members of the Weather Enterprise down here in the Deep South, Mike Wilhelm. Mike has been a friend for at least 25 years. Mike is from Huntsville, Alabama, and he unexpectedly passed away on Saturday. Mike was a storm spotter, chaser, volunteer, servant's heart. You know, and a lot of times when you hear storm chaser, you don't know what you're going to get. You know, some people are in it for themselves, and that's fine. But Mike was in it to sincerely help people. I think some of his finest work came during the generational tornado outbreak of April 27, 2011, when he was in Tuscaloosa, when the EF4 came through, and his video and reporting helped us communicate the life-threatening danger that was inherent at the time. And again, we were just all in shock. His funeral will be Friday, and we will miss him greatly. So Mike, work well done. So let's see if we've got anything that just might happen to be in the email inbox. You never know what's in there, so let's find out.
Letters. We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
All right. This one comes from Terry. This is talking about Dr. Tim Coleman. I miss Dr. Tim and his well-versed opinions. A guest on the show, perhaps.
Oh,
We
there's
should bring
never
Dr.
opinions
Tim.
on this show.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
No one told me
Never.
that. Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
We'll see if we can find Dr. Tim and bring him back.
All right. Someone rope him in. This one from Eric Harris. Loved this episode. This was episode, let's see, Monday the 25th. So that was last week.
Yeah.
I grew up just east of Anniston, Alabama. And because of the Storm Alert Tour, I fell in love with weather. I didn't become a meteorologist, but still love it. What is the best free site or sites to learn meteorology? You've got theweatherprediction.com.
That's the Jeff Habe site.
Jeff
right?
Habe site,
Yeah.
which is a treasure trove. It may seem a little overwhelming at first, so maybe start with NWS Jetstream.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Any other suggestions?
Oh, there's so many out there.
There's-
If you-
Yeah.
You got the Comet. If you want to get
Comet.
heavy, you got the
Yeah,
Comet
Comet.
modules.
Right, and that's all free.
And,
You just get in there.
I think all you have to do is register, and
That's right.
the sessions are free. And the Comet modules are just really, really good and well done.
And that's something that all of us still do, because they still continue to put out modules and
That's right.
classes and information and new information. So that's
Yeah.
something that it's a continuing education. It's not just for beginners, it's continuing education. They have different levels. And yeah, it's free. So, all right, this one from Mark Ingalls in Richland, Washington. I was listening to this week's episode. This was about 2 weeks ago, especially the talk about the NWS as an app. I was wondering if there is a movement, Troy, get ready. If there is a movement to get smart speakers and smart TVs enabled with watches, warnings, and advisories similar to weather radio. Because they are becoming more common, I imagine it wouldn't be too difficult to set up alerts for tornado warnings to be sent out based on the polygon rather than the county. Just a thought. Has anyone heard anything about these smart? I am not updated on smart TVs or anything. I still have an old-fashioned TV.
I don't think that anything's really being done. I think the Weather Service is behind the curve in dealing with it. I mean, what would be so difficult about working with the weather radio people and trying to put GPS or a GPS mechanism in a weather radio to where people wouldn't necessarily have to even program in their counties, their location, maybe they could put in a diameter or whatever. Weather Service needs to get on the ball on this, decide what they're going to do on weather radio. If they're not going to promote it and use it like they should, then let's get rid of it. I still think the app is the easiest way to do it and still stay within the mission of the National Weather Service. They provide general forecast and provide via phone the ability to get your warnings, watches, advisories, National Weather Service products via delivery to the phone, via notification. So I think it's the way to go, but I don't have much confidence in the government to do much of anything these days.
Troy, thank you for... Go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I do think the Weather Service should open up a dialogue with the three players in the home speaker business. That's Amazon. I think Amazon's got the lion's share, Google and Apple.
Yeah.
I don't have, I take that back. I have a little Google mini thing. They gave it to me free. If you're a Google Drive customer, they gave you one free. So I've got the thing sitting in my desk, and I use it from time to time, but I do know a lot of people that are not technology freaks that have these things in their home, and any tool that can reach people is great. So why not? What's the harm of giving people the option of receiving tornado warnings and severe weather warnings on their home speakers? So
but
if
James,
nothing else, the dialogue should be opened up.
But
Well,
don't
and
you
then you
think
also-
before we do that though, James, that we ought to make a decision about whether we're going to cut off this weather radio or not, or decide what we're going to do with it? Come on.
Yeah, that's why. And look, publicly, I push weather radio. Publicly, I push it hard, but privately, like this show, this is for weather weenies. Joe Q Public doesn't listen to this. It's stale. It is really stale, old technology that has not been updated in years and years and years and years. That you're right. Either fix it or drop it. One of the two.
Well, then you have the other technology like Netflix and Hulu and Sling TV, and how, when tornado, what sort of alert can come across. You're telling me there's no way for an alert to come across that screen to alert people that there's a tornado warning and their registered location of where their IP address is?
But I don't think the Hulu or Netflix gives a damn about getting a warning out. I think all they're interested in is getting money.
Yeah, and then they're in San Francisco, and
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
they don't understand that, and I
No,
don't think
they
that's any interest. I agree. That's where people are now. Like ABC prime time. The idea of watching linear television is gone. People watch whatever they want, whenever they watch it.
Very true.
Either, you know, all these services, and there's got to be a way of reaching them. And I agree, but again, I'm not encouraged. But John, what were you going to say? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Not a worry, James. Troy opened the door, so I wanted to walk through. A week or two ago, Troy, you were talking about why cannot the National Weather Service and NOAA get their links operational. I was pulling my hair out over the last week because I could not reach NCEI. So I couldn't get the data to do the job.
Again, you forgot to say again.
Okay, again, and it was like the guys went on vacation last Tuesday and they showed up today at 9 o'clock, and all of a sudden I started getting the links back. I want to keep my hair, but this is.
Yeah. Well, no, and this is an issue, John, that not only you have to deal with as a CCM, or you have to deal with in the weather business, but you know, for the fact that the XMACES that this whole thing was down for a month or so because of some kind of fund. I don't think somebody paid the bill, you know, and so forth. And I don't know. And you know, it's interesting today, and I have to mention this because I know there are people out there that are watching us right now, and I have to give this a mention because I'm looking up on the wall and I see a dead MWIN screen up here, the Emergency Manager Weather Information Network. I was one of the people that was stuck with Rob Dale's old software, Real MWIN. I was still using an XP computer down here until 12 noon Eastern time today. After a long term of service, the MWIN service today, the bite blasters, which fed that, they were turned off by the Weather Service today at 12 noon and decommissioned.
Oh boy.
And so the emergency managers, which a lot of those emergency managers are telling me they weren't given much opportunity. This thing has been in notice by the Weather Service for a long period of time, but a lot of people begged to keep these things going. The Weather Service turned it off. They want people either on the satellite delivery for that, or they want them on the NOAA Weather Wire service. It's interesting, and I don't know. It's going to be, you know, how that word gets out. I really like to see more people like Aubrey, like all of us, somehow getting more involved. Sometimes I love the people there in the Weather Service at headquarters, but sometimes I think they're tone deaf to what's going on with their users, their partners, their constituents that are out here that rely upon, just like Dr. John does, upon that data service, and it goes down, and everybody, this would never have happened to many of these services, even the basic weather wire service, which of course was copper wire back in the day, but I've just never seen anything like what we're going through now with this. We're, for a government agency, really unacceptable.
Yeah, I had to issue an apology to a number of my clients today saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see if we can get all this mess fixed here. All right.
Before next week, James. Before next week.
Yeah, Aubrey, go ahead. We cut off Aubrey's segment here.
That was it. So email@weatherbrains.com. If you want us to continue on that rant session, you can send us an email to email@weatherbrains.com. Send us some good stuff.
All right, so I got to go change clothes and go on television. I'll let one of you all finish the show here. But did y'all? My pick of the week? It's the guy that was doing the weather.
I saw that.
It was somewhere in over the pond in Europe.
Where's Kevin when you need him? Yeah,
yeah. And so the guy has one of these Apple watches going here, and he said, you know, it was going to snow, and the watch just totally contradicted him or something. I mean, that was the watch just snapped back at him. So your watch is always listening, and you might want to turn that thing off if you're doing the weather on television. But anyway, that's my pick of the week. So y'all pick it up here, John. You take it from here.
Thanks, James. This is awesome. Is this yours, Aubrey?
That's mine.
This is awesome.
Mine is, I found this by accident. So there is if anyone is in Minnesota, I need you to find a way to ship me this beer to Virginia.
Yes, me too.
Or to
Let's
bring
go.
it
Let's
to
go up there.
NWA in Tulsa next year. So this is
Right.
Bad Weather Brewing Company in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they have some amazing weather themed beer. And they have a new one I saw on Instagram that came out today. And that was their lightning one that came out today. So they have a Wind Vane India Pale Ale. They have the Sun Pillar Belgian Blonde, the Ominous double, I think that's a Belgian, the Anomaly Raspberry Sour. I mean, these are just incredible. And actually, if you look at their store, they have some really cool merchandise.
So this place has to have weather dweebs working at it. I mean, you've got to have.
Look at their story. So go to badweatherbrewery.com and look at their about section. And it's actually kind of a really cool story. And their merchandise is really cool, really fun. I've actually never been to Minnesota, but if I can come up and find someone to visit, I want to. I'm not going to go up in the wintertime, so it's got to be a good time of the year.
Come on, Aubrey, let's go up next week. Come on.
Yeah.
Troy, I'm going to come and see you next week if you're 85 degrees. That's where I'm going next week.
Come on down.
I'm going to go up
the
in
day
the
she gets here, it'll
summertime.
start snowing. You watch.
You know what? I'm going to go up in tornado season. I'm going to go up in like July in their severe weather season and go to Bad Brother Brewing. But if someone can figure out how to ship me some, email at weatherbrains.com. But yeah, it's just a really cool place. It's just kind of one of those cool weather nerd things. And I love it. You know what? I need to send them some information. I think we need a name.
Let's get them on. Let's get them on the air. I'm not against plugging a little brew.
What do you guys think about asparagus?
There you go.
The asparagus.
How about mamadas?
Ungelatus.
Ooh, mamadas. We need to bring them on the air.
Yes, we do. Yep.
There's a brewery in Cape May, New Jersey, Cape May Brewing Company. And I've been there several times, and they have a fantastic IPA. It's called Evacuation Route, I think it is. Oh, it's awesome.
Love it. So that's my pick of the week.
Oh, that is great. How about you, Troy?
A couple of things. And by the way, and with James leaving, I kind of want to get, but on Thanksgiving Eve, we actually had severe weather and actually had 2 injuries from a tornado in Franklin Parish, Louisiana, by the way. And then we had tornadoes over into southern and central Mississippi that evening as well. So a reminder about the odd season, especially nighttime tornadoes and the threats for a lot of folks out there. My pick of the week, though, is an article which came out yesterday, actually, in the OU Daily. A great article for our friend and colleague, Dr. Kevin Clazel up at OU, Making the Call. OU meteorologists discuss winter weather closures. I do that same sort of thing, advisory nature only, for here at the University of Texas at Austin. And there are many things that happen in the background you don't want to know about, but really a good article on Kevin and the excellent job that he always does anyway. And it's a nice feature article. So if you get a chance, OU Daily is the paper, the college paper there at the University of Oklahoma, and it's in yesterday's edition, the 1st of December.
Oh, that's great. Good pick.
Yeah.
Troy, way to go. I had the pleasure
I gotta go. Sorry, guys. 2 minutes to show.
See you, Aubrey. I had the pleasure last week of leading a breakout session at the Event Safety Alliance Safety Summit up here in Pennsylvania. And I was talking, actually, I mentioned Kevin, and I was talking about the importance of getting the communication out there as well as the education. A lot of work to be done here, but that's how you get started.
That's right.
So Troy, my pick is actually the webpage for the New Jersey Weather and Climate Network. There's been a proliferation of these mesoscale networks across the United States, and this is a great one. It's manned by the Office of the New Jersey State Climatologist, which is at Rutgers, where my daughter goes to school. This is a great website. So that's my pick of the week.
Yeah. And a lot of that stuff's growing. John, as a result of the work that Kevin, that they did at the University of Oklahoma, that Kevin did the Oklahoma Climatological Survey there. Here in Texas, we have a brand new Mesonet site, a statewide site that's been set up underneath the Texas Water Development Board and created here, texmesonet.org, I think is that address. And they've really done a good job. They're not planting sensors, John. They're bringing in the existing sensors that pass muster, and then they're going to start looking at holes and begin then at that point, sometime in the future, assuming funding, to come in and fill up some of the holes. But we're seeing more and more of that. And I think a lot of that, you've got to go back, and even previous to Kevin being up at OCS and the many people up at the Oklahoma Climate Survey through the years that have really ensured the growth and the success of that wonderful network they have in the state of Oklahoma.
Oh, I agree. You remember the original Profs network? That was in Colorado, right?
Yep. Right.
I think that was the original Meso network, I think.
Right. And of course, nowadays we've got the great networks like CocoRa's, which are, it's nothing fancy, nothing technological about it, but look at the input from the grassroots here in this country and in other, even in Hawaii and around places outside the state. So really pretty amazing. And thanks for all the volunteer efforts out there from all those. I know there are a lot of folks that are watching us tonight that are probably CocoRa's observers. So.
Oh, absolutely. And folks, in my business as a CCM, I use that data on a daily basis. So keep it coming.
Absolutely.
We need it.
Absolutely. I'll let you close it out, Dr. John. You look better than I do tonight. So
I hope you continue to feel better, though, Troy.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
It's always great to have you on the show. I love the banter. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we do have a good time. And so far it's been a year since I've joined y'all. It was about a year ago when I did it. And I'm just surprised we haven't had the lawyers out yet. So it's great. So
I run into a few every now and then, Troy.
Okay.
We'll keep it on the good side.
Okay.
Well, thanks again for joining us. And WeatherBrains, we're on every Monday evening from 9:30 East, 8:30 Central Time. We welcome your input. If you got emails for us, send it to email@weatherbrains.com. And it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Have a great evening.
Take care, everyone.
Now. So long.
Thank you, Dr. John.
Thank you, Troy. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
It's always amazing. There's still people watching, but thank you guys for watching. Interesting show this week about the California fires. We'll come back next Monday night, regular time, 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. Got to get back in Studio A and finish this newscast in here. Y'all have a marvelous week. Thanks for watching and listening, and God bless everybody.